The 5 words that broke my life in half were spoken by my own brother, in the damp, stale pizza-scented air of our basement. I was 15 years old, and those 5 words, "Who would ever want her?" became the soundtrack to my next 10 years. They weren't just a question. They were a verdict. If you've ever been made to feel invisible, to feel like you were worth less than the space you occupied, then you know that a wound like that doesn't just heal. It festers. This is the story of how I took that wound and turned it into armor. If you believe that the most powerful revenge is the life you build in defiance of those who tried to break you, do me a favor, hit that like button and subscribe. You're going to want to see how this ends. The memory isn't hazy. It's crystalline, etched into my mind with the terrifying precision of trauma. It was a Friday night in November. Rain was lashing against the high basement windows, little more than slits at the top of the concrete walls. The air was thick with the smell of cheap pepperoni pizza, spilled soda, and the cloying scent of Axe body spray that clung to my brother Ryan and his friends like a second skin. They were sprawled on the worn-out sectional, thumbs flying across video game controllers, the sounds of digital explosions echoing off the wood-paneled walls. I had only come down to grab a book I'd left on the coffee table. I was trying to be invisible, a skill I had been honing for years. Shoulders hunched, head down, my oversized gray hoodie pulled up, its fleece lining a pathetic shield against the world. I was 15, and my body was a foreign country I didn't know how to navigate. All long, clumsy limbs, a mouth full of metal braces that caught on my lips, and a layer of baby fat that refused to leave. I felt like a collection of mismatched parts, and Ryan never let me forget it. I reached for my book, a worn paperback copy of Pride and Prejudice, and my elbow knocked over an empty can of Coke. It clattered against the floor, a sound as loud as a gunshot in the sudden silence. Every head turned. 4 pairs of eyes, Ryan's, and those of his acolytes, Mark, Kevin, and Josh, all landed on me. A deer caught in the world's most pathetic headlights. Kevin snickered. "Careful, Jen. Don't want you to trip over your own feet and cause an earthquake." The laughter that followed was sharp and immediate. I felt a hot blush creep up my neck, a wildfire of shame. I wanted the floor to swallow me whole. I mumbled an apology, my voice barely a whisper, and clutched the book to my chest. But Ryan wasn't done. He never was. He saw an audience, and I was his favorite prop. He paused the game, the sudden silence even more damning than the noise. He pointed at me with his controller, a lazy, contemptuous gesture. "Don't worry, guys," he said, his voice dripping with condescending amusement. He looked me up and down, a slow, deliberate appraisal designed to dismantle me piece by piece. The hoodie that was 2 sizes too big. The faded jeans. The clunky sneakers. Jennifer's never getting a boyfriend. He let the words hang in the air, a poisonous fog. I could feel the stares of his friends, not with pity, but with a kind of morbid curiosity. They were watching a dissection. Ryan smirked, that cruel twist of his lips that I knew so well. It was a look that said, "You are nothing." "She's fat," he declared, ticking the points off on his fingers. "Clumsy," he added, gesturing to the fallen can. He leaned in, as if sharing a profound secret. And honestly, he paused for dramatic effect, letting my humiliation marinate. "Who would ever want her?" The explosion of laughter that followed was a physical force. It hit me in the chest, knocking the air from my lungs. It wasn't just laughter, it was a judgment, a confirmation of every terrible thought I'd ever had about myself. I saw it in their faces, the pity, the disgust, the casual cruelty of teenage boys who had found a weak link. And my brother, my own flesh and blood, was their ringleader. I couldn't breathe. My eyes burned, but I refused to cry. Not there. Not in front of them. I turned and fled, stumbling up the rickety wooden stairs, their laughter chasing me like a pack of hounds. I slammed my bedroom door, the sound doing nothing to block out the noise still echoing in my head. My parents were in the living room. They must have heard it all. The shouted insult, the booming laughter. But when I'd passed them on the way to my room, a blur of misery, they hadn't said a word. My father just glanced up from his newspaper, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes, not for Ryan's cruelty, but for my noisy retreat. My mother, she just sighed, a soft, tired sound, as if my pain was just another household chore she didn't have the energy to deal with. This was the pattern of our family. Ryan was the son, the golden boy, the one who could do no wrong. I was the moon, a pale, silent satellite, there only to reflect his light or, more often, to be eclipsed by his shadow. His taunts were dismissed as just teasing. My reactions were labeled as too sensitive. They never defended me. They never corrected him. Their silence was a form of consent. It told me that, on some level, they agreed with him. That night, sleep was impossible. I lay in the dark, the floral pattern of my wallpaper feeling like a cage. Ryan's words replayed in a relentless loop. Fat. Clumsy. Who would ever want her? I could feel the weight of my own body pressing into the mattress, every inch of it a source of shame. I curled into a ball, wrapping my arms around myself because there was no one else to do it. And in that darkness, a different feeling began to sprout amidst the roots of my despair. It was a tiny, fragile seed of rage. It was a quiet, desperate vow. He would not be the author of my story. He would not get the final word, and my dreams that night were different. I wasn't running anymore. Instead, I dreamed I was walking into a grand ballroom. I was wearing a dress the color of midnight, and it fit me perfectly. Every head turned as I entered, but the room wasn't filled with mockery. It was filled with a stunned, reverent silence. And across the room, I saw them. My parents. Ryan and his friends. Their mouths were hanging open, their eyes wide with disbelief. They couldn't believe it was me. In the dream, I didn't say a word. I just smiled, a slow, secret smile. And in that silence, I was finally heard. For the next 4 years, that dream was my only refuge. My life at home became an exercise in erasure. I learned to walk the hallways like a ghost. I ate my meals quickly and silently, my eyes fixed on my plate, feeling the oppressive weight of my family's indifference. Ryan's taunts continued, evolving as we got older. They became more sophisticated, more psychological. He'd comment on the single serving of dessert I took, or the fact I was staying in on a Saturday night again. Each word was a small, sharp pebble thrown at the already fractured glass of my self-esteem. I poured myself into my studies, not out of passion, but out of a desperate need for an escape route. Good grades were a ticket out. A scholarship was a key to a lock I was rattling every single day. I watched other girls, the confident ones, the pretty ones, trying to deconstruct their magic. How did they walk? How did they talk? How did they exist in the world without apology? It felt like a language I couldn't speak. The day I turned 19, I had my acceptance letter to a state university 300 miles away and a small scholarship that would cover tuition but not much else. I had saved every dollar from a part-time job at the local library, a place where silence was a rule, not a symptom of dysfunction. I packed one suitcase and a cardboard box. My mother stood in the doorway of my room, wringing her hands. "Are you sure about this, Jennifer? It's so far away." It wasn't concern. It was inconvenience. She was losing her live-in ghost. Ryan leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, that familiar smirk plastered on his face. "Running off to college, huh? Don't worry, they have hoodies and sweatpants there too. You'll fit right in." My father just grunted from downstairs, "Don't expect us to bail you out if you can't handle it." I looked at the three of them, the architects of my isolation. I felt nothing but a cold, clear resolve. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't hug them. I simply walked past them, out the front door, and didn't look back. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. My house, the only home I'd ever known, shrank until it was just a tiny box on a street I no longer belonged to. The past was behind me. Ahead lay 300 miles of asphalt and a future I was going to build with my own two hands, fueled by nothing but spite and a dream of a midnight-colored dress. The girl they thought they knew was already gone. I just had to show the rest of the world. Part 2. The first 6 months were a special kind of hell. The freedom I had craved felt less like liberation and more like a vast, terrifying emptiness. My world had shrunk from a family home to a cramped dorm room that smelled of disinfectant and my roommate's microwaved popcorn. Her name was Sarah, a bubbly, effortlessly social girl who would invite me out to parties I always said no to. I'd watch her get ready, watch her friends flow in and out of our room in a river of laughter and cheap perfume, and I'd feel that same old pang of otherness. I was an island, and the tide was always going out. The money I'd saved evaporated with dizzying speed on textbooks and instant noodles. I got a job waiting tables at a greasy diner near campus, a humbling, exhausting ordeal. I'd spend hours on my feet, forcing a smile for customers who looked right through me, my pockets heavy with loose change, my clothes smelling of fried onions. At night, I'd collapse into my narrow bed, my muscles screaming, the ghost of Ryan's voice whispering in my ear. See? This is all you're good for. Serving other people. Still clumsy. I dropped more than one tray of drinks, the crashing sound of glass on linoleum a perfect echo of my own shattering confidence. The shame was a constant companion. The freshman 15 was a real thing, and on me, it felt like a confirmation of my brother's prophecy. My diet of cheap diner food and stress-fueled ramen packs was a betrayal of the dream I'd held onto so tightly. I'd catch my reflection in a shop window and see the same girl who had fled her parents' basement, just sadder and more tired. One night, after a particularly brutal shift where a customer had called me "sweetheart" with a leering grin and left a crumpled $1 bill as a tip, I hit my breaking point. I sat on the cold tile of my dorm bathroom, the door locked, and I cried. Not silent, dignified tears, but ugly, gulping sobs of pure despair. The dream of the ballroom, of the midnight dress, felt like a cruel joke. A child's fantasy. Maybe Ryan was right. Maybe this was it for me. Maybe some people were just meant to be footnotes in someone else's story. I looked at myself in the mirror. My face was puffy and red, my eyes bloodshot. The reflection was almost unrecognizable. This wasn't me. This hollowed-out, defeated creature was not Jennifer Miller. I had survived 19 years in that house. I had clawed my way out. I would not let the ghosts of the past drown me now. The rage I'd felt that night in my bedroom came roaring back, but this time it wasn't just a seed. It was a forest fire. It burned away the despair, the self-pity, the exhaustion. And in the ashes, there was clarity. The dream wasn't the problem. My methods were. I was waiting for a fairy godmother, but this wasn't a fairy tale. If I wanted a transformation, I'd have to build it myself. From the ground up. The next morning, I woke up at 5 a.m., before the sun, before my roommate even stirred. I put on my oldest, baggiest clothes and went to the university gym. The weight room was intimidating, a cavern of iron and grunting masculinity. I felt every eye on me as I walked awkwardly to a treadmill in the corner. I started to run. It was agony. My lungs burned. My legs felt like lead. Every step was a battle against the voice that said, "You can't do this. You're too weak. Go back to bed." But with every painful stride, I imagined I was running away from that basement. With every gasp of air, I was breathing in a future where I was in control. I ran until I was drenched in sweat, until my whole body trembled with exhaustion. And as I walked out into the cool morning air, gasping, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, a flicker of power. It was small, but it was mine. That run became a ritual. Every morning, 5 a.m., no excuses. I started reading, not fiction, but books on nutrition and exercise physiology I borrowed from the library. I learned about macronutrients and caloric deficits. I stopped eating the diner's greasy leftovers and started packing my own meals, Tupperware containers filled with grilled chicken, brown rice, and steamed broccoli. It was bland, monotonous, but it was fuel. It was discipline. Slowly, painstakingly, my body began to change. The pounds started to come off. My clumsy limbs started to feel more coordinated, more powerful. I moved from the treadmill to the weights, my initial fear replaced by a fierce determination. I learned the movements by watching others, then watching tutorials on my phone late at night. The first time I successfully deadlifted my own body weight, I felt a surge of triumph that was more intoxicating than any praise I'd ever received. I was literally, physically, building a stronger version of myself. But the industry I had set my sights on cared about more than just strength. The world of modeling was a beast of a different nature. My first attempt was a disaster. I saw a flyer for an open casting call for a local department store catalog. I spent hours getting ready, my hands shaking as I applied makeup I barely knew how to use. I walked into a brightly lit studio filled with dozens of other girls. They were all tall, impossibly thin, and radiated a confidence that made me feel like a child playing dress-up. When it was my turn, a woman with a severe haircut and a clipboard looked me up and down, her eyes cold and clinical. "Walk for me," she commanded. I walked the length of the room, my heart hammering against my ribs. Every step felt awkward. I was acutely aware of my arms, my legs, everything. She didn't even look up from her clipboard. "No. Your walk is all wrong. Too heavy. And your portfolio?" I don't have one," I stammered. She sighed, a sound of profound boredom. "Next," she called out, already looking past me. The rejection was a slap in the face. It felt just like the basement. I walked out of that studio, the city noise a dull roar in my ears, and felt the familiar sting of shame. Fat. Clumsy. Who would ever want her? I almost gave up. I almost let that one rejection be the end of it. I sat in my car in the parking lot, the steering wheel cold beneath my fingers, and thought about driving the 300 miles back home, crawling back into my old room and admitting defeat. But then, the image of my brother's smirking face flashed in my mind. The image of my parents' indifferent eyes. And the fire returned. No, I would not give them the satisfaction. This rejection was not a verdict. It was data. My walk was wrong. I would fix it. I didn't have a portfolio. I would build one. That night, I didn't cry. I got to work. I found a part-time photography student, a guy named Alex who was trying to build his own portfolio. I offered to be his test subject for free. Our first shoots were awkward. I didn't know how to move, how to hold my face. I looked stiff, scared. But Alex was patient. "Don't think about posing," he told me. "Think about a story. Who are you in this shot? What are you feeling?" So I did. I channeled the anger, the loneliness, the defiance. I thought about the girl in the basement, and I gave her a voice through my eyes. And in one of the photos from our third or fourth shoot, I saw it. I was standing in an alleyway, late afternoon sun cutting across my face, and the look in my eyes wasn't Jennifer's. It wasn't scared or apologetic. It was fierce. It was challenging. For the first time, I looked at a picture of myself and saw not just a stranger, but someone I wanted to be. That photograph became the first page of my portfolio, and the first piece of evidence that I wasn't just running from my past anymore. I was building something to replace it. And I decided right then that the girl in that picture needed a name. Jennifer Miller was the girl who got laughed at in a basement. She was the girl who ran. This new person, she needed a name that could walk into any room and command it. Part 3. The name came to me in the middle of a lecture on Elizabethan drama. The professor was talking about Christopher Marlowe, the playwright, a contemporary of Shakespeare, but darker, more intense, a man who lived a dangerous, unapologetic life. Marlowe. It sounded like armor. It was elegant but sharp. Jen Marlowe. It felt right. It felt like a destiny I could choose, not one that was assigned to me. The first time I introduced myself as Jen Marlowe was at a meeting with a small, local modeling agency. Walking in, I felt a shift in my own spine. I wasn't Jennifer Miller, the clumsy girl from a broken home. I was Jen Marlowe, a professional. My portfolio, now filled with the best of Alex's photos, was tucked under my arm. My walk, practiced for hundreds of hours in my tiny apartment with a stack of books on my head, was steady and purposeful. The agent, a woman named Clara, was skeptical. She flipped through my book, her expression unreadable. But she didn't dismiss me. She saw the fierceness in that first photo. "You have a very strong look," she said, her tone measured. "But you're raw. Very raw." She offered me a non-exclusive contract. It was the lowest rung on the ladder, but it was a rung. I took it. The plan, as I thought of it, was no longer just a vague dream. It became a series of calculated, strategic objectives. It was a war, and I was its sole soldier. Clara got me small jobs, local print ads for furniture stores, walking in a runway show at the mall. Each one was a training exercise. I studied everything. I learned how the photographers set up their lights. I learned which angles flattered my face. I learned how to convey joy, sorrow, desire, with just a slight tilt of my head or a change in my gaze. On the runway, I learned to dissociate from the crowd, to enter a trance-like state where the only thing that existed was the beat of the music and the end of the catwalk. My life became a monastic routine of discipline. Gym at 5 a.m. classes. Shoots in the afternoon. My job at the diner at night. Study. Sleep. Repeat. I had no social life. I made no real friends. My focus was absolute, my determination terrifying. Sarah, my roommate, eventually stopped asking me to go out. She started looking at me with a mixture of awe and concern. "Don't you ever just relax?" she asked once. I just shook my head. Relaxation was a luxury I hadn't earned yet. All my money went into my career. Better clothes for castings. Professional headshots. A plane ticket to New York for a week of agency go-sees during Fashion Week. My parents had called a few times in that first year. Stilted, awkward conversations where they'd ask if I needed money, not because they wanted to help, but so they could hold it over me. I always said no, a reply that felt like a small, sharp victory. After a while, they stopped calling. I was an afterthought, just as I'd always been. Ryan never called. New York was a brutal awakening. I was a tiny fish in an ocean of sharks. I went to dozens of castings, waiting in lines that snaked down hallways with hundreds of girls who were taller, thinner, and more beautiful than I was. The rejections were fast and impersonal. Too commercial. Too short. Not the look we're going for. Each no was a needle prick, but my skin was getting thicker. I was learning to see it as business, not a personal failing. On my last day, demoralized and almost out of money, I went to a final casting for a new, avant-garde designer. The waiting room was filled with ethereal, otherworldly-looking models. I was clearly out of place. I almost walked out, but the memory of that basement, of that laughter, it held me there. You don't quit. When I walked into the room, the designer, a severe-looking man named Antoine, barely looked up. He was draped in black, his face a mask of creative ennui. "Walk," he said, the word clipped and bored. This was it. My last chance. I took a deep breath, and I didn't just walk. I performed. I channeled every ounce of frustration, every rejection, every lonely night, every drop of rage into that walk. My stride was powerful. My gaze was a challenge. I wasn't asking for his approval. I was daring him to look away. For the first time that week, someone really saw me. Antoine looked up. He watched my entire walk, his head tilted. The room was silent. I reached the end of the room, turned, and walked back. I stood before him, my heart pounding, but my face was a calm mask. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said 2 words to his assistant. "Book her." That show changed everything. It was a small off-schedule show, but it was attended by the right people. A blogger took a photo of me on the runway, my face stark and severe under the harsh lights. The photo went viral in the small insular world of high fashion. My look was dubbed beautifully severe. An agent from a boutique agency in Paris saw the photo. A week later, I had an email with a plane ticket and a contract offer. The move to Paris was another plunge into isolation, but this time it was different. I was no longer a lost girl. I was a professional on a mission. I lived in a tiny apartment, a chambre de bonne, on the 7th floor of a building with no elevator. I learned French from apps on my phone and by listening to the conversations in cafes. The work was grueling. 10, 12 castings a day, running across the city on the metro. But I was booking jobs. Editorials for independent magazines. Small campaigns. The breakthrough, the moment that blasted the door off its hinges, happened almost a year later. It was for a campaign for one of the world's most iconic perfume brands. The photographer was a legend, a man famous for his portraits that seemed to capture a person's very soul. He didn't want a model. He wanted a story. During the casting, he didn't ask me to pose. He just talked to me. He asked me where I came from. I didn't tell him the whole truth, but I told him I came from a place where I was told I was nothing. I told him I was rebuilding myself. He listened, his eyes intense. Then he picked up his camera. "Show me," he said. "Show me the woman who defied them." I looked into his lens, and I didn't see a camera. I saw Ryan. I saw my parents. I saw every person who ever dismissed me or looked through me. And I let my eyes speak for me. I gave him the defiance, the pain, the strength born from that pain. The result was a single black and white photograph. Just my face. It was the antithesis of the smiling, vacant beauty of most perfume ads. It was raw, emotional, and captivating. When the campaign launched, that photo was everywhere. On billboards in Times Square and Shibuya Crossing. On the glossy pages of every major fashion magazine. My face, my story, was plastered across the world. Jen Marlowe was no longer just a name I'd given myself. She was a brand. A month later, my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number with a familiar area code. I let it go to voicemail. The message was from the chairwoman of a major charity foundation in my hometown. They were hosting their annual gala, their biggest fundraising event of the year. They wanted to honor me as a special guest, a hometown girl who had achieved international success. I stood on my balcony in Paris, looking out over the glittering city lights, the voicemail playing on a loop. Go back. Go back to the place that had been my prison. A cold, clear feeling settled in my gut. It wasn't fear. It wasn't hesitation. It was the distinct, chilling click of a final puzzle piece falling into place. The dream of the ballroom, of the stunned faces. It was no longer a dream. It was an itinerary. The huntress was going home. Part 4. The 2 weeks leading up to the gala were a masterclass in controlled precision. This wasn't just a public appearance, it was the final scene of a decade-long play, and I was the writer, director, and star. Every detail had to be perfect. I called in a favor from Antoine, the designer who gave me my first break. I didn't want a pretty dress. I wanted a weapon. He understood immediately. What he created was a masterpiece of shimmering silver silk that looked like liquid moonlight. It was elegant and severe, clinging to my frame in a way that was both powerful and feminine. It was a dress designed to be looked at. It was armor forged from success. I flew into my hometown a day before the event, checking into the presidential suite of the city's most luxurious hotel under my professional name, Jen Marlowe. The name felt like a shield, protecting me from the ghosts of Jennifer Miller that haunted every street corner. I didn't call my parents. I knew they would have seen the announcements in the local paper. The prodigal daughter, the local girl made good. I could imagine their confused pride, their desire to now claim the success they never once nurtured. Let them wait. Let them wonder. The night of the gala, as I got ready, I felt a strange, detached calm. My hair was styled in a sleek, severe chignon. My makeup was dramatic, emphasizing my eyes. As I looked at my reflection, I saw the woman from the perfume ad staring back. She looked ready for battle. There was no trace of the girl in the oversized hoodie. She was gone. I had burned her away with sweat, tears, and sheer force of will. The ride to the museum where the gala was held was silent. The city lights blurred past the tinted windows of the town car. For a fleeting moment, I felt a flicker of the old anxiety, the fear of being seen and judged. Then I crushed it. I was no longer on trial. Tonight, I was the judge. When the car pulled up, the scene was exactly as I had pictured it in my dreams. A throng of photographers and local news crews were cordoned off behind a velvet rope. The red carpet stretched towards the museum's grand entrance, a path of fire. As my driver opened the door, the night air exploded with the sound of clicking shutters and shouting. "Jen! Over here! Jen Marlowe!" The flashes were blinding, a storm of light. I paused at the edge of the carpet, letting them get their shot. I moved with a practiced grace, my posture perfect, my expression serene. Each step was deliberate, a reclaiming of the ground I had once fled. I was a universe away from the girl who used to hunch her shoulders to take up less space. Tonight, I owned the space. All of it. I saw them before they saw me. They were standing awkwardly near the entrance, clearly out of their element. My parents looked older, grayer. My mother was clutching her purse like a life raft, her eyes darting around nervously. My father was stiff in an ill-fitting tuxedo, trying to look important and failing. And between them was Ryan. The years had not been kind to him. The golden boy had tarnished. He was pale and puffy, his former athletic build gone soft around the middle. He wore a suit that was a size too tight, the fabric straining at the buttons. But it was his eyes that struck me. The arrogant confidence was gone, replaced by a sullen, bitter resentment. He looked like a man who felt the world owed him something it had failed to deliver. He was clinging to a glass of champagne, his knuckles white. As I drew closer, a local TV reporter I vaguely recognized pushed a microphone toward me. But before she could ask a question, her eyes flicked past me, and a look of recognition dawned on her face. She spotted my brother. "Wait a second," she said, her voice amplified by the microphone. "Isn't that Jennifer's brother?" The effect was instantaneous. It was like a switch had been thrown. The tidal wave of attention that had been focused on me suddenly pivoted. A dozen cameras swung in his direction. The shouted questions changed. "Ryan, is that you? What's it like being Jen Marlowe's brother?" The whispers rippled through the crowd, loud enough for everyone to hear. They weren't malicious. They were worse. They were dismissive. "That's Ryan Miller." "Who?" "Jennifer's brother." I watched his face. I saw the slow-motion sequence of his world collapsing. First, confusion. Then, dawning horror. And finally, a wave of raw, impotent fury. The title, Jennifer's brother, it hung in the air, an epithet, a brand. It wasn't a connection. It was a reduction. He, who had always been the sun in our family's solar system, had just been publicly, irrevocably demoted to a minor satellite of my planet. His entire identity, the one he had built on being the center of attention, was now just a footnote to mine. He clenched his fists, his face turning a blotchy red. My parents looked utterly bewildered, frozen in the sudden, unwelcome spotlight. And then, across the sea of flashing cameras and curious faces, his eyes found mine. For the first time in my life, he didn't smirk. He didn't mock. He looked at me, and I saw the bully finally stripped of his power. I saw the pathetic, hollow man he had become. He looked small, forgotten, and in his eyes, I saw the reflection of his own cruelty, returned to him 1,000-fold, not by my words, but by my very existence. I held his gaze. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I gave him nothing. My silence was my statement. My presence was my revenge. After a few agonizing seconds that stretched into an eternity, he broke eye contact. He looked down at the ground, defeated. The great Ryan Miller, broken by a pronoun. I turned back to the cameras, my poise unwavering. I gave them a small, enigmatic smile, and the flashes erupted once more. As I posed, a single thought echoed in the quiet, calm center of my mind, a final, satisfying sign-off to the girl I used to be. Operation Cinderella complete. I didn't speak to them that night. I walked past them and into the gala, where I was greeted with applause. I made my speech, accepted my award, and mingled for the requisite amount of time, a serene smile fixed on my face. All the while, I could feel his eyes on me from across the room, a burning, hateful gaze that no longer had any power to harm me. I left early. As the town car pulled away, I looked back at the museum, a glittering palace of light. The revenge wasn't the moment the cameras turned on him. That was just the result. The revenge was the years of 5 a.m. workouts. It was the thousands of rejections. It was the loneliness and the discipline and the relentless, obsessive focus. The revenge wasn't about tearing him down. It was about building myself into someone so far beyond his reach that his opinion became irrelevant, a whisper in a hurricane. The best revenge wasn't loud. It was the deafening silence of my name eclipsing his. It was the quiet calm in my own heart, where the wound he'd carved into me had finally scarred over. I was free, not because he was humiliated, but because I had finally become the person I had dreamed of all those years ago in a dark, lonely room. I had saved myself. And that was a victory no one could ever take away. It's a strange thing, justice. Sometimes it's not about an eye for an eye. Sometimes, it's about building a life so full of light that the shadows of your past can no longer touch you. The most profound victory isn't in seeing your enemies fall. It's in rising so high that you no longer have to look down to see them. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What's the best revenge you've ever heard of? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories of justice served. Until next time.